Hey guys, it's Bunny back here again. I am back to full-time streaming, and that also gives me the ability to do more content. And I want to start out with the new content by bringing you a guide on a deck that I've always loved to play for as long as it's been in Hearthstone. And I'm glad it's finally back with the newest mini expansion. It seemed to have gotten some upwind, and I hope it stays that way for a little bit. So here we go. Here is a Quest Shaman deck that I've played to top 9 legend. Actually, so rank 9 legend, got top 10 with it, and I've had tons of fun with it on stream. I'll link the VOD for the stream in the description as well if you want to check out some more gameplay than the one I'll be able to show right now, and more than I'm able to cover right now. But I want to give you the basics of the deck. I want to tell you how to play this deck well and what to look out for, what the Mulligan is, and how you can basically approach this deck from the start. So here we go, let's dive right into it. First things first, Mulligan. Of course, we're always keeping the quest. It's called Quest Shaman. I don't think that was a question. And then we have cards that want to take extreme advantage out of our first quest step, which is, of course, you're getting all the overloaded mana crystals back that you've had. And the best card for that, of course, is Lightning Bloom, because it gives you a lot of tempo in the early game and also overloads you for 2, so getting rid of these mana crystals is great. Another card that's absolutely awesome is Guidance. The reason why Guidance is that great is because it gives you additional resources and hopefully more overload cards to be able to progress your quest in the future. If you already have Lightning Bloom, one of my favorite keeps here is Diligent Note Taker, because of course on turn 2 you can go Note Taker, Bloom, you'll get a Bloom back from the Note Taker, and then you can play more cards. You can also hold off on playing the second Bloom, which is a really cool concept, and only use part of your overload to make an even more powerful turn after, if your mana usage is more optimal that way. So to recap, we have the Wand Maker, we have Lightning Bloom, and we have Guidance, that are cards that you're going to always keep no matter what the matchup is. Of course, if you're on coin, I think also Serpentine Portal is a great card. And to some extent, I also really like Primordial Studies and Cookie the Cook here, but those, of course, you can vary a little bit, depending on what you play against. So let's go a little bit more into detail into what the Mulligan is for different decks that you're currently seeing on the ladder and what are the archetypes. So if you're playing against something more aggressive like Face Hunter, or mostly you'll see Aggro Druid or some Paladins, you'll probably be pretty well off keeping removal cards and not card draw heavy cards. Something that is great against aggro, especially Druid, is Perpetual Flame, because it lets you just clear their entire boards pretty cheaply, and if you get it off before the first step, you're even getting all the mana you would have usually overloaded back. So that card is pretty amazing. Of course, you're still keeping Wand Maker, Bloom, and Guidance, and for these kind of decks, it's really great if you have already like a Lightning Bloom or a Perpetual Flame, where you can duplicate some of those with Diligent Note Taker, as they're really, really important tempo cards. If you're on the coin against more aggressive decks, Serpentine Portal is absolutely amazing, kills a lot of 2-3 minions, and it can even be kept in a combination with Novice Zapper and Bloom, stuff like that. But basics here are, if you have Perpetual Flame, if you have Bloom, you're already very, very happy. Cookie the Cook is also a really good aggro, anti-aggro card, because you play it out, it has a lifesteal, it gives you the weapon inevitably, that lets you lifesteal and remove more boards. It's really good for controlling the board. If you play against more control-ish decks, and to those decks I would even count to some extent Warrior, or maybe Warlock. Like, even though Quest Warrior is a pretty aggressive deck, against more control style decks where you expect the game to go a little bit longer, it's quite important for you to be able to get your quest completed to the fullest, and then finally get a Brucan to double all your battle cries and then be able to play mostly Charge Call, which at that point gives you 9 or 10 drops for super powerful taunts and board control tools like the Angry Rabbit, as I like to call it, and other board controllish cards like Feral Spirits and whatever you might have created along the way to be able to close out the game and build boards that are simply overwhelming for these kind of decks. So, now that we've stated our objective against control, which is, of course, to get to the late game and get the quest completed, you also get a better feeling of what you should keep as cards. I think same still applies as always. Wandmaker, Lightning Bloom, and Guidance are incredibly good cards to keep in the mulligan. And if you already have a Guidance, keeping a Diligent Note Taker is quite amazing. Because against more slow decks, you don't even need to necessarily copy the Bloom for the tempo, because you might not necessarily be in the position where you get out tempo, but you rather want to complete your quest. And then the additional resources from playing Diligent Note Taker, Guidance, and then being able to replay that Guidance, even let's say if you had a Bloom in hand, might be the correct play. Some of the new power level from this deck comes from the Multicaster, which is the last addition from the mini set into this deck, which lets you draw a spell for every different spell school you've played in the game. You only have 3 different spell schools in this deck so far. You have Primordial Studies, which is Arcane. You have Perpetual Flame, which is Fire. And then pretty much everything else in your deck has either no type or is nature. Most of them even being nature spells. So you usually don't have to worry too much about them being nature spells. So Primordial Studies can be a great keep against control this deck because it gives you already this arcane spell that you usually don't have, or that you have to somehow randomly create in order to get more draw of the Multicaster. And more draw equals more resources. And as soon as you draw the entirety of your deck, you're going to be able to complete the quest way faster, and you're able to get out super, super powerful combos. Lightning Bloom, Overdraft deals a ton of damage, is ridiculous amounts of mana cheat, lets you re-grab the board while you're dealing damage, while you're removing. That's absolutely what you're looking for if the game gives you the time. And that's kind of the case that you run into against control decks. That's why I like keeping Primordial Studies against the more controllish decks on top of Guidance, Serpent Shrine Portal, Wandmaker, and of course, as always, Lightning Bloom. Those are cards I really, really like if the game goes a little bit slower. Because here, of course, like I said, our objective is to get the quest done. Against Aggro, our game plan is pretty simple. Survive, run them out of resources, grab the board, and overwhelm them with that. You don't need to finish the quest in order to be able to win the game. Now you might be asking, well, Bunny, you're missing the most prominent deck in the game, and that is currently Rogue. What do I do against Rogue? I have to say, Rogue's a pretty bad matchup, and Rogue is not going to typically give you the time to do anything super powerful with a quest reward and then play spells afterwards. So in that case, you become purely the aggro deck. You try to kill your opponent as quickly as possible, playing Wandmakers, Macaws, Portals super aggressively, trying to gain tempo. And then for one big swing, if you have drawn some card against Rogue, they usually go wide on board with a bunch of little minions. You want to go Perpetual Flame onto all their minions, overload for 6 or 7 mana, which is usually super bad, and then plant that Overdraft into their face for maximum face damage. It's often okay for your minions to go face and for your spells to be removing minions, just to push as much damage as possible before they can finally get their super strong combo off. So that's the way I like to play against Rogue. It's not a good matchup, but you have to always try your best. Cookie's actually not that bad against Rogue either, because you have 6 damage from the weapon, and 6 damage is a lot of damage for 3 mana spent, on top of them having to remove your card. So I think Cookie is also an amazing card in this case to be kept. You can even keep it against everything in the game just because of how awesome of a removal card Cookie is against pretty much everything that is out there. All right, let's go a little bit more after we talked very lengthily about the mulligan and how important that is. I always like to stress mulligan is the most important part of your game. The rest you can learn, but the mulligan you have to somehow you have to figure out, you have to know from data, you have to watch people stream, and it will help you a lot. If you have the right mulligan, I think the rest of the game plan you'll be able to iterate on the fly. All right, so let's go a little bit into gameplay. And I touched a lot of it already in the mulligan phase because things are somewhat intertwined. You have to know what to keep in the mulligan to be able to figure out your game plan and then continue on with the gameplay. But here are a little bit of tips and tricks that I kind of have for this deck that I think are great. Number one, like I said, against control decks, no taker into guidance is better than no taker into bloom most of the time, unless you're getting pressured off board super heavily. Number two, Instructor Fireheart is a great card to be played even if you have only 3 or 2 mana left. If you have, for example, 1 mana left and you have a bloom in hand and your plays aren't absolutely perfect or you don't know exactly what to play, play your Fireheart. Get the quest done using the Fireheart. Don't wait for your quest to be done to be playing the Fireheart at 10 mana, get maximum value, greed like a little goblin. You want to be getting a few cards out of there, and if you can get a few super good 1 mana cards out of Fireheart, that's absolutely amazing. That's all you need. That's if you get 2 hot streaks from it for 3 mana, and maybe 1 or 2 of them overload you, and you get to have another card that you have for the next turn to set you up where you get to discover something. Absolutely amazing. Don't hesitate. For example, I do it a lot on stream where I have 4 mana and you're thinking, oh, Fireheart, I can't really play that. But if you have a bloom in hand, you already kind of have 6 mana, and you that's 3 mana to be able to spend on your hot streak, and you have to whiff really, really hard to be able to not play good Fireheart. Fireheart also becomes a lot better when you do not need to pick value cards. For example, if your opponent has minions on board, and you can also pick removal cards at the same time as you could pick value cards. Value cards, of course, guidance, primordial studies, that kind of stuff, lightning bolt, overdraft if you overload it. Of course, those are the amazing cards you always want. Or even the 1 mana spell that draws you another overload card. Those are amazing picks all the time, but if your opponent has 1 minion on board, Fireheart becomes even more powerful because also removal cards become playable. This is a really important tip, and I think being able to play Fireheart at the right moment in this deck is absolutely crucial. Tip number 2 is that Brilliant Macaw after Fireheart does not work. Don't try it. But the cards you will be given are completely random. You can still hot streak them, but they're completely random. So you probably want to take the Brilliant Macaw to combo with the Wand Maker, or to ideally get it after the Multicaster, which is what I've been trying to do. Tip number 3, also don't greed with the multicasters. If you get 2 spells out of the multicasters, absolutely amazing. That's all you need is a 4 mana 3/4 that draws you 2 cards. If you draw 3, of course you're in heaven, but that's why I like Primordial Studies. Primordial Studies Blue Multicaster, for example, that's already 2 cards drawn, and like I said, if you draw a bunch of cards with this deck, you get to combo your powerful overload cards with overdraft and be able to finish your quest quickly, cheat a bunch of mana, and click your opponent in the face. Because after all, you can be a control deck, but sometimes you just have to be the aggro deck as well. 4th tip maybe is setting up for good perpetual flame, trying to manage your overload. Also, again, and I feel like I'm reiterating this a lot, don't be greedy with your charge call. This deck is a lot about tempo. Don't be greedy with your resources in this deck. If you get a charge call that lets you discover a random 5 or 6 drop, that's amazing. That's a lot of tempo to get back. That's a lot of tempo your opponent has to deal with early. That's the threats that they have to deal with, so they can't follow their own game plan. A lot of decks in this meta have super powerful game plans, and you don't have any direct disruption for them. But what you have is you have really powerful plays yourself. So go ahead, make these powerful plays, make your opponent respond to your powerful plays, rather than sit there with your cards in your hand and just try to make them even more powerful. At the point where your opponent might have already set up 10 mana Octobot, reduced their whole hand, and smashed you in the face for 25. At that point, Charge Call is not going to bail you out anymore as well. So try to also play these a little bit more aggressively. Try to go for board. Try to make your opponent react a little bit to what you can do. In the game currently, 7-drops are pretty bad, but there's Keymaster Alabaster. So if you're playing against a draw-heavy deck and you feel like my back's against the wall, I'm playing against a Demon Hunter, they've already completed their quest, I don't know what to do. Keymaster Alabaster, same goes for Rogue, can be amazing because it can give you all these cards for super cheap and maybe make them focus a lot of their resources they would have liked to dedicate to card drawing or killing you to be able to deal with that card. But other than that, 7-drops really, really bad. Usually wouldn't go for them. 6-drops are amazing. You have Gadgetzan Auctioneer that can give you draw chains. You have the 6 mana 4/9 dragon Spellburst give you 2 additional spells to your hand. So if you have another, that card is also very sticky, it doesn't need to immediately be activated. Most of the decks can't deal with 9 HP, so even if you get it, you don't need to immediately activate it. You can get spells further, and like I said, resources in this deck, even if they're random, are pretty good. 5-drops are pretty high quality. There's some obvious high rolls like Ogremancer, or Inara. I mean, there's just a bunch of really, really good 5-drops that you can discover. And then, of course, the 8-drops in this game are amazing. You have Alakir for Burst. You have the Morg Taunt, the 8 mana 8/8 that gives you 8 armor. You have Primordial Drake if you need to be more board-centric. You have a lot of really, really powerful options at 8 mana, and it's really, really hard to brick on 8 mana to get anything that's really bad. 8 mana is a safe option, but I encourage you in the more tempo-heavy matchups, just go for like 6 mana drops. Even if down the road you could go for 8. If you want to go and play a bit more tempo-heavy, go for these 6 drops. Try to really pressure your opponent out. Maybe get a clearance and then hit them a bunch of times with that 5/5. And then last but not least, I have a little bit something about card replacements. This deck is of course only 2 days old, and it's the first draft I got from an opponent I played against on ladder. There's a few changes I'm currently thinking about making. If you don't have certain cards, I always get the question, how can I replace them? I think good replacement cards that fit really well in this deck are Feral Spirits that are currently not in there. Or if you face a lot of aggro decks, I think a second Cannon Slugger can be pretty good. You can, for example, also only play 1 Brilliant Macaw. That kind of card is for me still up in the balance. It feels a little bit meh, it's not quite powerful yet. I'm not really sure if I want to play it. The Multicaster is great. I think that one you shouldn't replace. It's also easy to craft. But yeah, for example, if you don't have Fireheart, if you don't have Cookie, if you don't want to play 2 Macaws, if you want to replace any other card in your deck, the cards that you would go to are number 1, Feral Spirits. Those you can play as a 1 or 2 of, or the second copy of Cannon Slugger. Those are like your 3 replacement slots that you could fit in this deck quite easily. Thank you for tuning in my little deck review. I think that's all for now. I have a ton of gameplay on this deck. If you're more interested, if you have any questions, if you played it and you're like, I don't like this, I don't like that, how do I play this, how can I improve? Feel free to come to my channel. I stream basically 5 days a week. You can check out my VODs, they're free to the public again. On my Twitch channel, I'll link it in the description below again. Or let me know here in the comments as well. I'll try to answer as many questions as possible on what you think of this deck, what your questions are, what your struggles are, if you like it, if you don't like it. Just let me know and I'll try to be as active as possible. Yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. And one last thing, let me know below what deck you would like the next guide to be on. So I'm gonna start with Quest Shaman because it's been a deck that I've always been a huge fan of. But let me know in the comments below, what is the deck you would want to have the next deck guide on. I'm trying to make this whole series a little bit more consistent than it's been previously, where I try to take decks, say once a week, once every 2 weeks, depending on how much new content is out there, and try to do a little deck guide. Let me know. Also, appreciate obviously if you leave me a like or a subscription on my YouTube channel. It would help me tremendously making this channel grow and being able to make more guides. Thank you guys very much, and I'll see you as always on the stream.